line with us is a guy for whom I have tremendous respect. I think, you know, how many journalists these days will hop on a plane and go into a war zone, who will show up at disasters and also can do their own show on television as the host, as the moderator. It's just like he's like the Renaissance man of news. Ali Velshi, the host of MSNBC's show Velshi on weekend mornings. Louise and I watch every weekend. Ali Velshi on Twitter, AliVelshi. Ali, welcome to the program. It's so great to have you with us.
It's really great to be with you, Tom. Thank you so much for having me.
I wanted to find out what you learned when you went to Ukraine. I've traveled the world myself over the years and in many different ways and with different hats on. And you get a perspective on things from being on the ground and talking to people that you just don't get any other way. The politics, the geography, the ethnography, you know, how the people are, how people are responding. What's in addition to the obviously to the military situation. Can you share your story? Share some stories with us.
Well, I took the slow way into Ukraine. I started at the Hungarian border, and then I went up to Poland, and then I went in. So I was mostly talking to refugees in the first few weeks that I was over there. I was there for a total of 6 weeks, and it was devastating, Tom, to talk to these people. They were almost exclusively women, some old men and some young boys, but men, fighting age had to stay. So these women had left their husbands, fathers, sons, and family behind, and they'd moved to another country. And I would see them literally as they got off the train, as they crossed the border. And I think one of the reasons why you want to be there with people as opposed to talk about this in abstraction is because what you realize is that there was no relief. When these people got out at the border or in Budapest or in the Polish side of the border or in Warsaw, there was no relief. They were in a country where their money didn't work properly, their SIM cards didn't work, they didn't speak the language in many cases. That we're in a world that's hostile toward immigrants and refugees in general, less hostile to them than Europe has been to, let's say, Arab and African refugees. But the bottom line is still hostile, out of touch with their loved ones. And at that moment, Tom, that all of this military strategic NATO maps and discussions about how this was all going down didn't matter. These were just real people shocked out of their reality and their lives, displaced from their homes, unclear if they'd ever see their loved ones or their homes again, with the very immediate problem of having no food, money and credit cards that maybe didn't work, and young children. So when you get on one of these trains, I was meeting people who've been on trains for 20 or 30 hours. This isn't business class on Delta, right? You get on, you carry what you carry, and most times you're carrying food, your kids' clothing and belongings, necessities, and strollers or car seats or things like that. The desperation and the horribleness of the things that still happen in 2022 was the most striking. Now, the other part of this is that this happens all over the world, right? There are people being displaced, and we've forgotten about them in Yemen, in Syria, throughout Africa, the Rohingya, in China, the Muslims, the Uyghur Muslims. The advantage of being on the ground in these countries and being able to talk to them, on one hand, seems kind of weird, right? How come we're so interested in these white refugees and we forget about all the other ones? On the other hand, it was that little bit of reality that caused me to remember this is happening to people all over the world. It's wrong everywhere. And we need to see this and smell this and touch this and say, stop. We can't keep doing this.
Yeah, the situation of refugees is when you're there in person. I spent a number of years doing international relief work with an organization based out of Germany, and we took over one and we created another refugee camp in Uganda in 1980 during the war with Idi Amin. We did the same thing in about 6 other countries and that I was involved with, and literally watching people starve to death. Seeing families torn apart. Literally, I mean, it's very difficult to
grow up with these things. They might be there for 2 generations, and the cost to children of not having a real education. I mean, we know that when you take a kid out of school and you move them to a different neighborhood in a city, they have adjustment problems. Yeah. What about other countries? What about places where there's hostility? What about the dangers to them and their families, the family separation? So that is, that's the thing that really stood out to me, that we have to not look at these things on maps and in terms of geopolitics sometimes. It might be time in our world that we we focus a little bit more just on the humanity.
Yeah, I'm with you. I was in Hungary when Orban was rising to power, and he was at that time viewed as a Democrat, a small d Democrat, as a guy who was going to kind of save his country. He has turned into I would argue, a neo-fascist autocrat, And I'm curious, you traveled through both Poland, and I've traveled through Poland as well. In fact, the year that the Soviet Union fell, I traveled through Poland and up through Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And I'm curious your sense of those two countries in particular, because they've both been kind of anomalous in the European Union in that they are swinging hard to the right. Yes. Orban has seized control of the judiciary. He's put his cronies in charge of all of basically every industry in the country, but in particular the media. There is no more really legitimate critique of the Orban government. And the main thing that he used to really solidify control back, when he first ran for re-election, what was that, 10 years ago, was the Syrian refugees coming in as the result of the Russian and Saudi bombing, or the Russian bombing rather of Syria, the war that was going on there. And, he made these outrageous statements, that Hungary is a Christian nation. These people are bringing the disease of Islam. They're bringing, lice and worms and, all of this kind of anti-refugee stuff that we've heard from basically fascists for years and years. What was Poland and Hungary? And in Poland, Duda and these guys, they've kind of echoed that, although it's been a fainter echo, but there's still somewhere between neoliberalism and fascism, in my opinion. What was it like in those countries? What's your sense of the political atmosphere there, and how badly is this explosion of refugees? I mean, this would be the equivalent of tens of millions of refugees coming into the United States. How badly is it screwing up the politics of these countries?
Well, look, Hungary's an unusual situation in that it is linguistically isolated from everywhere else in Europe, right? So it allows Orban and his ilk to have a slightly stronger argument if you're open to that argument, and that is these people, whoever these people are, insert group, are diluting us. Now, it's extra obvious when it's Arab refugees or brown people or Muslims or whatever the case is. It was a little less obvious with the Ukrainians, but it was still there. So unlike the difference in Poland is that the government, also, as you say, swinging right, was an earnest partner in the NATO efforts to defend against what Russia was doing. Hungary is not an earnest partner in this. Hungary is turning fascist. Orban was uniquely pro-Putin right up until the moment that he kind of wasn't, and even then he's lukewarm. He's the most reluctant and resistant of the NATO participants. They've got all sorts of rules about how they will defend, but not really, kind of, sort of. In Poland, they were welcome. Refugees were welcomed by the government. They were given stipends. The kids were enrolled in school and were taught Polish. Hungary was sort of had a view of you can come in here and leave as soon as you'd like. So the civil society activities in Hungary were much more robust than in Poland, because in Poland the government was actually organizing. So you had the Red Cross and you had UNICEF and you had the various aid organizations under the umbrella of government organization to protect these Ukrainians, whom, by the way, the Poles have a very rough history with the Ukrainians. They're not friends, generally speaking. Yeah. In Hungary, it was a totally different issue. I saw people and individuals stepping up to fill the void left by the government over time. And I reported on this very actively. And not only does Orban like to stifle the domestic press when they criticize him, they tried to stifle us too. Orban's people wrote a letter to the president of NBC News complaining about how I was working for the political opposition, because, as you know, there was just recently an election. So while I was there, they were in election mode. So they want to stifle everybody's press. And my response was, if you don't like something I'm saying, you're welcome to come on my show. We can argue this out. But he didn't take me up on that. Not. But you really could tell the difference in flavor in two countries that have veered hard right, between Poland and Hungary, in their treatment of the refugees and their execution of what their role would be in Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Yeah. It was very, very different on both sides.
Having been there in Ukraine, and we've got about 2 minutes here before we hit a hard break and the machine jumps in whether I want it to or not. Having been in Ukraine, what's your sense of where this is going? We're getting very mixed messages, for example, out of the current attempt to fight back against the Russians, and nobody's really sure if that's because it's going well and the government doesn't want the Russians to be notified of military activity, or if it's going badly and nobody wants to talk about it.
It's probably going a little better than we would think in the seventh month of this war. But every passing day is advantage Russia, right? They've got a lot of oil to sell the world. India and China will not stop buying their oil. That's where they get most of their foreign money from. They've got ways to build up more troops. I will say the Ukrainian people have resolve I have never seen in people. I had people coming up to me saying, we didn't vote for this guy. We didn't vote for Zelenskyy. We thought he was a bit of a clown. He probably is honest, but Ukraine's a corrupt country, and we didn't think an honest guy could work within that system. And now everybody is a Zelenskyy partisan. They'd like to get back to a world, by the way, where you don't have to be a Zelenskyy partisan, where you can go back to arguing your political differences in a civil way. By the way, so would I, Tom. We don't have that in America. But I think that the world should watch these Ukrainians and say, here's some people we didn't study much. A lot of us don't know a lot about. These people are there to fight for their democracy, because they know once it's gone, it's very, very hard to get back. Americans should think similarly. We have different threats facing us, but the erosion of democracy is a global threat that is very real to us right now.
In our last 30 seconds here, Petro Poroshenko was the previous president, and he was, kind of famously corrupt, but he was a Democrat. I mean, the transfer of power was all good with him. What do you think is his future?
He's trying to show up. I mean, he comes on my show every now and then. He wears a bulletproof vest, and he's got guys around him with guns. He's trying to seize the moment, but he has come out on the right side of it. So I suspect he could resurface as a political entity. I don't think it's to be the leader of Ukraine, but he's around and he's on the right side of things right now.
Interesting. I kind of saw him as like the Mitt Romney, or maybe even Ted Cruz of Ukraine. I don't know. Ali Velshi, the great Ali Velshi, MSNBC's show Velshi on the weekends and filling in all over the place. Ali Velshi, ALIVELSHI on Twitter. Ali, it's great having you on the program. Thanks so much for dropping by. I look forward to future conversations.